is the new 2026 Hyundai Ioniq 9, and it's a fully electric three-row SUV, an electric SUV for the whole family. It's also loaded with modern technology, some cool stuff, and it's got distinctive styling. And today, I'm going to take you on a thorough tour of the new Ioniq 9 and show you all of its quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. So far, Cars and Bids has sold almost $500 million worth of cars, all sorts of special, interesting stuff like this, and this, and this, and this. So, if you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car, do it at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Ioniq 9. Now, it's important to mention that I can't get behind the wheel and drive this vehicle yet. It's just been announced. This is a pre-production model, and it doesn't go on sale until next spring. I'm sure I'll get the chance to drive it before then, but for now, I'm just going to give you a thorough tour and talk quirks and features. But we'll start with a basic overview. Like I said, fully electric three-row SUV. And that's a big deal because there's not really all that many fully electric three-row SUVs unless you spend big money for a Rivian or a Tesla Model X. But those are a lot more expensive than this will be. Now, the Ioniq 9 shares its architecture with other Hyundai and Kia electric vehicles, including the Ioniq 5, the Ioniq 6, and of course the Kia EV9, which is essentially Kia's fully electric three-row SUV version of this. The Kia certainly looks quite different from the Ioniq 9, but otherwise they share architecture and have similar powertrains. Now, like I said, this goes on sale sometime early next year, in spring 2025, in the next 6 months, and it's built in the United States in Georgia. But on to the quirks and features, starting with the key, which is tremendously cool. You can see it's oval shaped, and actually the key is the Hyundai logo, the Hyundai H, and then the negative space on the edges of the H are all the buttons: lock, unlock, the horn, the engine starter. That is a tremendously cool idea. Seen it on some other Hyundai models, they're using it here as well, and I love that little quirk. But this egg-shaped key also has a few other functions you can see on the side. There's the obvious button to open the tailgate, which you'd expect. There's also buttons to move the car forward and backwards when you're standing outside the car. I've demonstrated this before in other Hyundai videos, and I'll link them below so you can see, but those buttons will literally move it forward and backward like a remote control car. But to me, the most surprising button on here is this one. It's the button to pop open the front compartment, the hood, which of course in this case is a front trunk. Most cars, getting into the front requires pulling a latch in the driver's footwell, even electric cars that don't have an engine up front. But here you can access the front trunk by holding down a button on the key fob, and then it pops right open and you can get inside. And here you can see there's a front trunk, although frankly a relatively small one. You probably only use it for charging cables or other smaller items. Worth pointing out though, Hyundai told me the front trunk will be larger in rear-wheel drive models. This one with all-wheel drive has some more mechanical components up here that take up trunk space. But since we're talking about the front of the car, we gotta talk pixels. You can see the giant front running light is made up of little squares that essentially look like pixels. And that is a running theme of this car. Very obvious from the front, and put on the turn signal, and it too is pixels on either side instead of traditional lighting. You have pixels, which you will find all throughout this car, as I'll show you. In fact, you'll even see it in the headlights, which are mounted in the lower part of the bumper. It's not just one big headlight cluster, instead little individual pixels that make up the headlight, a running theme of the Ioniq 9. And the pixel theme is continued on the back, where you can see they're basically everywhere. On all sides of the tailgate, above to the side below, you have pixels. And most of those pixels make up rear lighting elements back here, which frankly are pretty cool. The rear lighting design essentially goes the entire way over the top and sides sides of the rear of this car. You can see some of it is tail light, some of it is turn signal, and some of it is brake light, but it all looks pretty cool, and it certainly is distinctive. Now, you'll also notice there's a group of pixels mounted on the bumper. That would be the reverse light, more pixels, more lighting, and even the rear reflectors you can see at the base of the bumper on either side have been made into pixels instead of your regular traditional reflectors, which is kind of cool. Now, the other unusual design element on the Ioniq 9 is the eyebrow over the wheels. You can see this panel here is, well, actually a distinct panel from the other ones on the outside of the car, and that's because on some versions of the Ioniq 9, this panel is a different color. It can be black to provide some contrast or look different. Obviously, in this top trim model, as you can see, it's painted body color, so it's not as noticeable, but when it's a contrasting color, it certainly looks different and distinctive, and they call it the eyebrow. As for the overall look of the Ioniq 9, certainly interesting. I think it looks nice. It doesn't have the same sort of bold, muscular, boxy look as the Santa Fe, or sort of the upright kind of king of the road look as the Palisade or Kia's Telluride. It's a little bit more kind of windswept and flowy and maybe a little more graceful than those vehicles. And it's especially more graceful than the Kia EV9, its platform mate, which is interesting, but frankly a little overstyled. This car avoids that entirely, and you wouldn't say that about the look of the Ioniq 9. And by the way, one other interesting design element, this car does not have a shark fin antenna like so many other vehicles do, mounted sort of in the center on the rear. They ditched it entirely. It adds a little aerodynamic benefit, and they were able to include the shark fin antenna stuff into the glass on the outside of the car. So no shark fin here, which is a surprise. And next up, let's move inside the Ioniq 9, where once again there are many more interesting quirks and features, but let's start with the pixels, which are such a theme in this car that the pixels are on the center of the steering wheel. Instead of the Hyundai logo or Ioniq 9 printed there, they've gone with the pixels. This car is that pixely. In fact, these pixels will actually light up, and they can alert you to things that are explained in your screens, so they have a function beyond just being pixels, but they certainly are pixels. And by the way, worth pointing out, those 4 dots on the steering wheel, it just so happens that 4 dots is the Morse code symbol for the letter H. So in a way, they do have the H logo on the steering wheel, just represented in pixel form. Anyway, let's talk general interior before we get too far. I should point out that Hyundai told me the theme of this interior was sort of a relaxed, natural lounge. And so you have a lot of kind of curvy lines and edges instead of sharp angles or creases or squares like in other vehicles, off-roaders or performance cars. This is all about relaxation and calmness. They were trying to cultivate a lounge-like atmosphere in here. And frankly, I think that's a reasonable approximation of what they've done. It does feel like sort of a nice, calm place to be compared to some more aggressive vehicle interiors. And probably the best example of that is the seats. This car is equipped with what Hyundai calls relaxation seats in the first 2 rows. And what that means is the seats can fully lie flat. They can recline basically all the way to allow you to sort of relax and lie down and take a nap. There's even a footrest that extends out from the base of the seats to elevate your feet while you're napping, obviously not behind the wheel, but it's possible when you're in a rest stop to lie down and really feel refreshed thanks to the relaxation seats. Another interesting quirk is the center console. You can see it here. It's got there's some buttons, some controls, typical stuff, but the cool part is it moves. If you want more center console and back, you can push it back, and then your rear passengers have access to some stuff back there that I'll show you. If you want it further up here, you want to get into the storage compartment a little bit better, you can move it forward, and you can choose whether you want it positioned front or back, which is kind of a cool idea, a sliding center console. Now, worth pointing out, on on this center console, you can see the wireless phone charger, and again, many pixels that make up the sort of rubbery surface to keep your phone from sliding around. Of course, it continues the theme, as I mentioned. Now, speaking of charging stuff, also worth pointing out, you have 100-watt USB-C ports. You can see here, USB-C, and it says 100 watt to keep your devices charged as fast and as well as possible. Kind of a cool feature in this car. Next up, one that's a little bit more unusual is the gear selector, which sticks off the base of the steering column and it's sort of stuck in place. And to move between the gears, as it were, you twist the edge of the steering column. So you twist it forward for drive, you twist it sort of back and towards you for reverse, neutral is in the middle, and park is a button on the end. Interestingly, the start-stop button for the Ioniq 9 is also mounted on this gear lever coming off the steering column. You can see it right there. You start the car by pushing that. It's a little bit quirky, as is the glove box. You can see it's latched on top, which is odd, and there's a little shelf right above the glove box where you can put stuff, which is nice and practical, and there's even a little cubby on the inside of the glove box lid, which is also a cool idea to maximize storage in here. And speaking of the dashboard area, over there you can see this beautiful sort of brushed aluminum trim with a nice design. It says calligraphy, which is the top trim level of the Ioniq 9 and other Hyundai models. And so this gives you an idea of what the most luxurious version will look like. But anyway, next we move on to the infotainment and screen technology in this car, which I have to say is generally excellent. Hyundai and Kia do a great job of infotainment tech, and I really love the center screen. You can see it's sort of curved in this large screen area towards the driver. It looks cool, and it's very responsive, very intuitive, easy to set up, and of course, you can hook up to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well. And there are quite a few interesting screen features worth pointing out in the Ioniq 9. One is not in the center console screen. Instead, it's the rear view mirror, which is itself a screen. You can see right now it looks like a mirror, but if you flip this switch, it's now a screen showing a camera behind the car, which is nice to have. If you have a bunch of passengers or stuff in the car, you don't have to try to look through them to see what's behind you. You got a camera back there and your view is unobstructed. But there's a lot more cool stuff in the infotainment system as well. One of my very favorites is a feature called Sounds of Nature, where there are preloaded sort of nature sounds that come with the car. So if you want to drive around, you don't want to listen to music, you want to hear calming, relaxing sounds to go along with your lounge theme, you can do that. Take a listen to a sound of nature. Maybe more practical, another nice feature in this center screen is the camera system. First off, pulling up the camera is tremendously easy. There's a button in the center console, P with a little camera. You push that and the cameras pop up right away, showing exactly what you want to see. Many different angles, including a 3D surround view camera, so you can move your finger and see exactly what spot of the car you want to see. This will prevent you from hitting curbs or other obstructions when you're parking. Very nice to see. Another nice feature in here, this car has massaging seats. You can turn it on and enjoy a nice massage while you're being driven along in your Ioniq 9. And here's a wonderfully practical feature. Speaking of seats, you can raise or lower the rear seats from the infotainment screen. You go in here and they're power operated and you can drop them or raise them from the screen, which obviously is tremendously useful. If you're inside the car already ready to go and a kid gets in back and realizes the seat was folded down from before, you don't have to get out, go back there, put the seat back up. You can do it all right here, which is an excellent idea. And another excellent idea is a feature called Safe Exit, where this car will alert you if you're about to open up your door, but there's a vehicle coming. It'll alert you, hey, there's a car coming. Maybe don't open the door right now because it's going to hit your door and it could injure a cyclist or damage your vehicle. That's a cool idea, and so is a feature called Leading Vehicle Departure Alert, which basically means you're sitting at a stoplight, maybe you got distracted on your phone or doing something else inside the car, changing the radio. Well, if the car in front of you starts to move, this will actually warn you and ding ding and tell you, hey, that car is moving, it's time to go, and it'll bring your attention right back onto the road. A few other cars have this, I've noticed. It's surprisingly useful, especially for the distracted among us. Now, speaking of the center screen, one other thing that I like in the Ioniq 9 9 is that the climate controls have their own dedicated function that isn't incorporated into the screen. You can see the climate controls are all down here. They do have their own screen, but they're completely static. They don't move. They show exactly what you'd expect. They're in an intuitive place. And I especially like the feedback you get when you press certain controls. A little blue lines light up next to what you pressed, almost looks like ripples in a stream when you're turning on a climate thing. And it's a nice little confirmation of what you did, and frankly, a cool piece of attention to detail. Now, the other part of the giant screen situation in this car is the gauge cluster screen situation, which frankly, I've never been a huge fan of in Hyundai or Kia models. It's just not configurable enough. It just doesn't show enough stuff. You can change what's in the center screen, and you have a little bit more configurability than that, but they don't let you show like a full screen map next to your music or precisely display exactly what it is you want to see like so many other automakers do. And frankly, I don't really understand the point of going to a gauge cluster screen if you're not going to allow a little bit more configurability in that slot. Now, fortunately, you do have a heads-up display, which also provides a little bit more vehicle information directly in front of you. But frankly, I'd love to see more configurability in the gauge cluster. This is a constant complaint I have with Hyundai and Kia models. However, with that said, one great feature in the gauge cluster screen is the camera system that shows what's in your blind spot. You activate this by putting on the turn signal, and you can see it's showing exactly what's in the blind spot, so you don't only have to do sort of an over-the-shoulder check and turn your head away from the direction you're traveling. Instead, it shows precisely what's there on both sides. This is an excellent feature that basically only Hyundais and Kias have, and I wish more automakers offered it as well. Now, it's also worth pointing out the Ioniq 9 is equipped with all sorts of driver assist technology like auto steering and adaptive cruise control. Since I can't drive this Ioniq 9, I'm not going to review that stuff or even really talk about how it operates. I've driven it in other Hyundai models, and generally I find Hyundai's system to be pretty good, but I haven't driven it yet here. More on that in a few months when I get behind the wheel of the Ioniq 9. And next up, we move on to the second row, the back seats in the Ioniq 9, where you got a lot of space back here. This doesn't look huge from the outside, but inside it really is large. And even with the front seat position, kind of where I would sit as a tall adult, I have a full amount of leg room, knee room, headroom, especially as a tall passenger in back. There's really a lot of space in the first two rows. And don't forget, the second row seats can entirely recline, like I mentioned. This relaxation seat, it will fold all the way back down so you can lie back here and relax. Again, not really while the vehicle's in motion because the seatbelt won't fully cover you, but you can lie back here and enjoy a nice time in the back of the Ioniq 9 if you want to take a nap while it's not moving. It's also worth pointing out the back of this car has the same nice materials you have up front, and that includes the seats with this nice comfortable leather feel, and you can see these nice perforations in the backrest, and there's even a little design in the center which includes 4 pixels, keeping the theme going even in back. Now, also worth pointing out in back, a few other interesting quirks and features. Probably the most interesting is that sliding center console, which you can see I've got it slid pretty far back now, and it delivers some good stuff to the rear passengers. Specifically, your climate controls in this model, you can adjust them back here with this control panel, and that includes heated rear and cooled rear seats, which you don't often see, especially in a family SUV. You also have access to the center console storage area. This opens the normal way from the front. It just sort of opens up, but from the back, you gain access to the very same compartment, except it's rear hinged. It can be front or rear. It's magical, obviously. That's kind of a cool touch. You also have this little cubby, almost like a drawer that slides out of the back of the front center console where you can put more stuff. The only drawback of this sliding console is you can't move it from the back seats. It moves forward or backward, but it only moves from the front. So the front passengers can choose where the console is going to be, and the rear passengers just have to live with it. Now, if you want to get into the third row in the Ioniq 9, it's quite simple. You push this little button on the side of the seats, and in this trim, the seat sort of automatically does its own thing. It sort of folds forward, slides forward, and gets out of your way so you can get into the third row. And for easy third third row access. There's even a little grab handle mounted right here, sort of in exactly the spot where you would grab to try to steady yourself in order to climb into the back. Now, the roof line of the Ioniq 9 may make it seem like there's not all that much space in the third row, but Hyundai tells me there's more third row headroom back here than in the Rivian R1S, which is impressive because that has more of a boxy flat roof design you'd think would have more space. But this really is a space maximizer, and the third row seats have decent space even if you have a full-size adult sitting in the second row. The third row, it should be pointed out, also has cup holders, as you can see, for third row passenger drinks. And you have USB-C ports back here for third row device charging. And you even have power-operated backrest, at least in this trim level, where you can move the backrest forward or backwards in the third row, which isn't something you can normally do in a vehicle like this. It's a nice luxury feature, even for people who get stuck in the way back of the Ioniq 9. And finally, we move on to the cargo area in the Ioniq 9. Getting back here, press the button on the key fob and it pops open automatically, as you can see. And back here you have decent space even behind the third row, more than I was expecting in a vehicle like this. It's less than 200 inches long, certainly on the larger side of midsize SUV, but definitely not a big suburban size thing. Still decent cargo space back here. And if you want more, putting down the back seats is easy. You got buttons over on the side where you can easily power fold the rear seats. They just drop right down. You don't really have to do anything but push a button. And if you even want more space than that, the storage floor can be lifted up and you can see a little bit of extra storage space under the floor where you can put smaller or more valuable items if you don't want them rolling around. But that stuff is pretty typical in vehicles like this. There's also some rather unusual quirks and features back here. Probably the most unusual is this little button over on the side, which is inside of a panel. You open up this panel and you can see this button closes the tailgate. And you're thinking, that's annoying. I got to do that every time I want to close the tailgate, open a panel, push this button on the inside. No. The regular tailgate closer button is in the normal spot on the base of the tailgate. This is an additional button, and Hyundai says it's there for camping or sleeping inside of your Ioniq 9. If you get your mattress all set up, your sheets, your blankets, and then you're ready to close the tailgate, you don't have to search around for the key fob or get out of the car to close it. There's a button inside for glamping. You press it and the tailgate comes down, and then you can sleep inside the car. And that's not the only cool feature they've come up with for people who want to camp in the Ioniq 9. Another one is the ability to turn off the front climate control vents and only run the rear climate control, which allows you obviously to turn on the heat or the air conditioning in back without wasting power or charge with the front climate control blowing as well. And another very cool camping friendly feature back here, this power outlet is designed to run off of the vehicle drive battery rather than the 12-volt battery that powers the accessories in most cars. That means that if you want to plug something in back here, you're not depleting the 12-volt battery, which can kill the car and make it so you have to jump start it. You're depleting the drive battery, which obviously has a lot more charge and capability, so you can camp back here and just run off that battery. And there's even a feature called utility mode, where you can set it so that all of the power ports, including the USB-C ports inside this car, will all run off the drive battery, none of them off the 12 volt, to again enhance your camping and sleeping experience inside the Ioniq 9. Maybe not too many people can actually use it for that as a family SUV, but if you want to, it's there, and that's some pretty cool, neat ideas for campers in this car. So with all the quirks and features in mind, let's talk Ioniq 9 basics. There's going to be 3 different powertrain versions. The base model is the long-range rear-wheel drive. You can also get long-range all-wheel drive or the performance model, and then there'll be trim levels from there throughout the different powertrain versions. Now, the entry-level long-range rear-wheel drive has only 215 horsepower and does 0 to 60 in about 8.5 seconds. It's not much power for a vehicle this size, but Hyundai says they're targeting an EPA range of 335 miles fully electric for that version, which is pretty good for a large family SUV. The performance model will have 420 horsepower, do 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. And Hyundai says even for that version, they're still targeting a range of over 300 miles. All versions will have a range over 300 miles, which is very usable, which is the point in a family 3-row SUV. Now, one other nice benefit in the Ioniq 9 is that the charging standard now uses the same power plug that Tesla uses, which means you now have access to the Tesla charger network, and that'll make like charger styles a little bit easier since it's a little bit more universal with more popular vehicles. Hyundai tells me this is also the first electric Hyundai with bi-directional charging, meaning you can charge the car or the car can charge you. No, but really, it can charge your house in the event of a power outage or give charge to a battery if you want to store it, which is cool to have. As for pricing, Hyundai tells me this will be positioned similarly to the Palisade, which is their 3-row gas-powered SUV. It's sort of similarly sized to the Ioniq 9. This will probably be a little bit more expensive, a little more premium of a vehicle, and in general, EVs are more expensive, but it'll compare relatively directly to the Palisade, except of course that it's fully electric, while the Palisade is all gas-powered engines. And so that's the new 2026 Hyundai Ioniq 9. There aren't many 3-row electric SUVs on the market, so this is a big deal. Take around your whole family in a full-size EV. It's also well executed with a nice interior, distinctive styling, and some cool features and tech. And frankly, I'll be really excited to get behind the wheel of the Ioniq 9 and drive it before it goes on sale next spring. For now, that's your most thorough tour yet of all the quirks and features of the Ioniq 9.